Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Catholic Truth Podcast, where we teach and preach the truth of Jesus Christ and the Catholic faith, which has come down over 2,000 years. We want to help you to know, love, and live your faith with purpose and passion, and even be able to defend it. And today we have a very powerful topic and a very great guest. And we're going to be talking about the topic of relativism. And this is important because this is one of the main weapons that the enemy is using to assault, undermine, and destroy the church today, and even all of society. Literally, the walls of society are crumbling down because of this weapon. It's kind of like a tearing down strongholds on the Christian side. So you really need to understand it. It's extremely important. And if you don't understand it, you're going to not be able to minister, to evangelize, and to reach pretty much the average person in society today who is not churched. So to help us with this topic today, we have a wonderful guest who has been on here before. He really needs no introductions, but he is Karlo Broussard. He is a full-time staff apologist at Catholic Answers. He's also a speaker who gives talks around the world on apologetics, Bible studies, theology, and philosophy. He holds 2 degrees in theology, and he's getting his doctorate in philosophy. He has published countless books and has authored various ones, including Meeting the Protestant Response and Meeting the Protestant Challenge, which is the last show we did. If you did not see our show with Karlo in the last one, this is a must-watch. It's phenomenal. And today we are going to be discussing his book, The New Relativism. And everybody knows, relativism in the old days, but nowadays, there seems to be a new relativism, a dictatorship. They're not playing nice anymore. They just want to seek, search, and destroy. So, Karlo, why don't you tell us a little bit about this? Give us a nutshell overview.
Yeah, Bryan. Well, thanks for having me. First of all, it's always a pleasure to chat with you, my friend. And you articulated at least one of the 2 new aspects of relativism very well, namely that it is militant nowadays as opposed to nice relativism. The old relativism had a tone of niceness to it. You have your truth, I have mine, we'll agree to disagree. And perhaps that's why many people jumped on the relativism bandwagon, perceiving relativism as the route to take in order to be the good guy, to be the nice guy. The new relativism, one of the aspects of it being new is that it is no longer nice. It is militant. It is truly a dictatorship. A dictatorship not only in the sense of governing the minds of people in a very pervasive way, which the late Pope Benedict XVI may have had in mind when he spoke about the dictatorship of relativism, but now it's taking on that real concrete idea of dictatorship where it's an absolutism, where it's no longer my truth. It's no longer your truth, my truth. Now it's you don't have your truth. You can't have your truth. It's only my truth. And so what we're experiencing now within our modern culture, Bryan, as I point out in the book, is the wicked offspring of relativism, because logically relativism leads to might makes right. Because there is no reality in the framework of relativism for the mind to be conformed to, there can be no persuasion of mind. That's entirely off the table. And all that's left is wills and a conflict of wills when there's disagreement. And so only the will with the most power, the voice that's the loudest, will win the day. And that's exactly what we are experiencing in our modern culture with the cancel culture, with the shame culture, with the constant moral indignation, which is not really an absolute morality. Rather, as I point out in the book, when you peel the onion layers back, when you pull the veil back, you unmask the modern new moral absolutism. What you discover is actually good old-fashioned relativism of both the total sort, like intellectual relativism, there is no absolute truth, and moral relativism. That is to say, there's no absolute truth when it comes to human behavior. So that's basically in a nutshell what's new about this new relativism. And then also, too, that it's hidden. The old relativism, Bryan, was a bit more in your face. Everybody was saying your truth, my truth. Everybody was saying there's no absolute truth. It was out there. It was blatant. Nowadays, you would think that that relativism is dead because of the culture of moral indignation and the shame culture that we live in. But when you unmask the modern moral commands, thou shalt not be a white supremacist, thou shalt not be intolerant, thou shalt not be anti-science or misinform or be a judgmental, hateful, bigoted, intolerant individual. what you discover is that relativism is actually lurking behind the absolutism of modernity, and which makes it even more sinister, Bryan, because most people, when they hear you shouldn't be a white supremacist, they're like, yeah, I can get on board with that. If that's all critical race theory is about, we shouldn't be white supremacists, then I'm on board with that. And so the unsuspecting person will adopt it, but begin to adopt the modern spin that's attached to these modern moral commands, which is outright relativism. And so the unsuspecting person will begin to adopt and embody the relativistic thinking embedded in it. And so that's what I expose in the book and provide the reader with some strategies as to how to refute that relativistic thinking embedded in the modern commands.
Yeah, it's a great book and a lot of great points that everybody needs to know. So it's called The New Relativism, Unmasking the Philosophy of Today's Woke Moralists. And we know that's true. I mean, if I didn't say it at the beginning, people, this is a war. It's a war, and not just against us versus them. It's against powers and principalities of darkness who are infusing and influencing the people of our culture, powers that be. I mean, they're basically telling you to shut up on social media and politics. They just, not only do they not want us to talk, they don't want us to have an opinion. Extremely dangerous. And for that reason, I might take a crass side note to ask you to support our ministry on Patreon or PayPal below, because this is not going to be put out by YouTube. This is not going to be promoted because of the topic. It's not going to be monetized. So if you could help us out, and definitely help Karlo out too by buying this book and being informed, because literally this is the bedrock. This Protestantism, Islam, important things, but this is what's sabotaging our culture right now. And I love your titles. Thou shalt not be a judgmental, hateful bigot. Thou shalt not say he or she. Thou shalt not misinform as they misinform. Like, it's literally hypocrisy from top to bottom. But why don't we start at the beginning? Give us a summary of thou shalt not be a white supremacist. I mean, obviously we shouldn't be a white supremacist. Any kind of supremacy is bad as they force their supremacy on us. But maybe you could discuss this in your chapter.
Yeah. So, I mean, like you said, Bryan, the common Joe on the street, when he interprets that modern moral command, he's going to say, absolutely, I'm on board with that. I don't want to be a white supremacist. White supremacy is bad, and we reject that. But what I do in the book is I unspin, right, the modern spin that's attached to this modern moral command, which is basically you can't affirm objective truth. For to do so, and to say there are right and wrong answers, there is rational thinking. To say there is objective truth is to oppress non-white people. To say there is objective truth is to be racist. Robin DiAngelo, a popular voice of critical race theory, in her book White Fragility, writes that objectivity is the ideologue of racism towards non-white people. As some students wrote at Pomona College here in Claremont, California, in response to their president, who said that the mission of the college at Pomona College was to discover truth and collaborate knowledge. They respond and say, to assert that there is a single truth is a myth and white supremacy. And so what I do in that chapter, Bryan, is I am unmasking this modern woke moral command and exposing it for what it is, outright total relativism, which is saying that there is no truth, there is no objective truth. And to say that there is, you're a bad person, you're a white supremacist, you're a racist, which is incoherent in itself, right, Bryan? Because in order to be guilty of white supremacy, which is a bad, evil thing, you need objective truth, right? If you reject objective truth, you cannot be subject to moral criticism of white supremacy. So that's an incoherence in and of itself. But of course, even the claim that to say there is a single truth is a myth, well, that would be a myth in and of itself, because that's a single truth claim, right? or to say that objectivity is the oppression of non-white people. That's a statement that these people assert applies to all peoples, all times, in all places. Well, that's objectivity. So I guess they're guilty of the same white supremacy that they're claiming we are guilty of as Christians, who say there is objectivity and objective truth. And so this is just one example, the tip of the iceberg, of the relativism that's lurking beneath this new moral absolutism, these woke moralists. Relativism is lurking beneath it. And it's important for us to expose that because, listen, Bryan, most people, when they hear of critical race theory, thou shalt not be a white supremacist, they're like, yeah, sure, I'm on board with that. But they don't realize that what that theory entails is an outright total relativism, which is dangerous stuff. Because if there is no objective truth, guess what, brother? There's no objective truth about you as a human being or me as a human being, which means there's no objective truth about justice, which means that if they have more power than us, they can enact injustices against us. And there you have might makes right. And there you have the evils of tyranny.
Yeah. And some people might find this strange or hard to believe, but you quote a lot of top people, organizations, politicians across the board who believe these things, not only believe them, but are teaching them.
That's right. So like these students at Pomona College, these are not just some, undergraduate students who don't know up from down and are just super confused. This is an idea that's being adopted and embodied by many educational organizations that you think would have a higher level of sophistication. And
that's what's scary.
And thereby reject it, but they're embodying it. The equitable math instruction curriculum that says to say there are right and wrong answers is a characteristic of white supremacy. That's adopted by 25 plus educational organizations, that curriculum is. Then you have other institutions who are pushing the critical race theory agenda to assert that a characteristic of white supremacy culture is rational thinking, affirming objectivity. And so this is something that we need to expose for people and put it in their face. And I'm confident, Bryan, that the pilot light of reason is flickering enough that when people see this, they're going to be like, well, wait a minute. How can racism be evil if there's no objective truth, right? How can racism be evil if there's no objectivity? That doesn't make sense. And hopefully they'll reject it.
Yeah. And this is tough, people, because many people use these excuses to not go to church, to not believe in certain godly laws, to follow their own paths of lives they want to live, decisions they want to make, lifestyles they want to engage in. These are the excuses they use, and they're very difficult to undermine because they're based more on emotion than on intellectualism, yes. Which is why you need to fight the fight on their ground. You need to understand how to get through to them their way, not your own way. If you throw facts and stuff, it doesn't matter because facts don't exist. See how they short circuit that? That's why it's important. Karlo teaches you how to short circuit each and every one of these arguments. And with that being said, Karlo, why don't we go on to the second one, thou shalt not impose. This is a huge one today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I put this within the intellectual relativism section because it suggests and embodies and carries with it this idea that there's no reality for the mind to be persuaded about in order to conform to. Because whenever you interpret this modern moral command, thou shalt not impose, what you discover what is meant is that you ought not to persuade others about your own belief. It does not entail the idea that you shouldn't go around physically coercing people to believe what you believe, right? Or physically coercing people to adopt your belief system. We can get on board with that and we can reject that and say, amen, that would be unjust coercion and that's wrong. We need to be inviting people to adopt our beliefs and not physically coercing them and manipulating them psychologically, emotionally, or physically. But what is meant is you shouldn't persuade others to believe what you believe. And that's a problem. Because that is, again, the offspring of relativism. Because within the mental worldview of relativism, There is no objective reality for all of our minds to conform to. So persuasion of the mind is off the table. That's not possible. We can only articulate our different realities. What we have here in this modern woke command, "Thou shalt not impose," is sort of practically the same thing. Keep your minds off of everybody, right? No persuasion of minds is allowed. And you might ask, well, why? Well, either because they're relativists and they don't believe there's any reality for the mind to conform to, or they're just frankly practical relativists. And that is to say, truth might as well exist. It doesn't matter. We don't care about it. So let's just live our lives as if there is no truth. And if there is no truth, there's going to be no persuasion of minds to conform to that truth. And so I point out in that particular chapter that this is just smacking of total relativism, and then looking at possibly some of the reasons, at least in some of the comments that are found online, some of the reasons why people don't want people to persuade others.
Let me just, sorry, you said something that made me something tinker off in my head.
Sure.
They want to persuade us that persuading others is bad.
That's right. That's one of the responses I have to the absolute itself, is that is special pleading, right? It's a double standard. They say that we cannot persuade others to believe what we believe, but yet in commanding us not to do that, they are trying to persuade us to adopt their belief, right? That we should not persuade others. So it's special pleading. We can't persuade, but they can. So that's one response. That's one way of responding to the modern absolute itself, generally speaking. But then in the chapter, Bryan, I zero down to take a look at some of the reasons that they give for not trying to attempt to persuade others. Like, for example, one of them is that it leads to conflict and violence. Whenever you try to start persuading people, it's just going to lead to violence. Well, in as much as they're trying to persuade me to adopt their belief, there's no violence going on. So their claim is self-refuting there, right?
Again.
And then also, too, it's a non sequitur. Listen, just because some things lead to violence and conflict, that doesn't mean we need to reject it. People fight over land and private property all the time. That doesn't mean we need to go and reject private property. So too, just because persuading others might sometimes lead to conflict and violence, that doesn't mean persuasion itself is bad. It might just very well be to the idiot who's not persuading others with charity, right? And who's a jerk about it. And that's leading to conflict and violence, not the act of persuading people to believe what they think is true, but it's a perversion of that desire to persuade others to the truth. And that's the problem, not persuasion itself. So these are just some examples of how I go about responding to this particular modern moral command.
It's amazing. It's just they'll tell you not to do something that they do themselves. And they say, oh, but you can't play by this rule. And they're breaking that exact rule. It's amazing. And they've done it for so long and they still don't get it, and I mean, as long as probably for the last, I don't know how long I've been a Catholic speaker, 2 decades probably. I've been speaking for a long time saying that, 30, 40, 50 years ago, the culture was telling us to be quiet, to not step on anybody's toes, to go pray in the closet, to not preach your faith, to not, force your beliefs on us. What did we do? What have we done for the last 50 years? We've listened to them, which is why we're in the mess we were in. And what did they do instead? They preached their truths. They forced their false faiths on us. They stepped on our toes. They came out of the closets. When we don't speak up and do what's right and share truth, we're going to get walked all over, and we have. And I think that's why this book is so important. It's called The New Relativism, because we need to start fighting back with truth. Truth is what wins, and charity, of course. But
absolutely.
And one of the I guess topics that we seem the most uncharitable about is the topic of thou shalt not say he or she. If you just don't accept people, and I guess this goes into imposing, but if you don't accept people, then you're just not loving. Why don't you just live and let live and love others, and just the world would be a better place?
Yeah, well, I mean, that assumes a particular understanding of love, right? in making that statement, we would have to ask the question, what is love? If your idea of love is just, we have to accept everybody's lifestyle choices as equal and valid, well, that doesn't make sense, because it would be unloving to fight racism, right? And so that would be inconsistent. So love must mean something else. That's right. You could throw that in. Love must mean something else. So what is love? To will the good of another. So now we're talking about what's good for somebody. So if I judge a particular behavior, say living according to one's perceived gender identity, a male trying to be a female, and I judge that lifestyle choice of transgenderism to be not good for the individual, then it would not be unloving for me to say, hey, you need to think about this and change your behavior and start living in a way that is right and good for you as a human being. And that would be the loving thing. And in fact, Bryan, the unloving response would be to continue to affirm, celebrate, and approve the person in doing what I think is contrary to their good as a human being. And so rather than my criticism of the behavior being a manifestation of ill will towards the person, like hate, it's actually a manifestation of goodwill towards the person, because I perceive this behavior to not be good, and I'm willing what is good and trying to help that person come to experience the good. So that would be one way of beginning to talk about this conversation, at least to respond to the particular comments you were making and hypothetically asking the question about loving, accepting, and letting live, right? We can't just let live. We don't let live when it comes to racism. Why? Because we judge racism as bad. And so too, we can't just let live when it comes, say, to transgenderism and the lifestyles associated with it, because we judge, at least we do as Christians, we judge that to be bad. And so we want to do what we can to try to rectify that. That's not a manifestation of hate. It's just a manifestation of, hey, this is inappropriate human behavior, and we're inviting people to begin living in a way that's consistent with our human nature and live in a way that is appropriate for us as humans.
And the bottom of the boat, in a sense, has fallen off. Like everybody has been, falling out of the boat for a long time. You could say the bottom of the hot air balloon has fallen off and you're in big trouble. Like we're literally free falling in our society to the fact where we don't even know a man is a man anymore, a woman is a woman. Right. But that aside, that even seems positive to the fact that we don't even know that people can't be cats. People can't be reptiles. Right. People can't be aliens. People are having surgeries because they think they're an alien or a cat or a reptile, in a human body. Yeah. And we're saying that's okay. Can you talk about how far we've come just briefly? And some of the things, like, for example, I don't even know if I can find it. Here it is on this page. You say, and what if I say I am a cat, or what if I am a dog? Lest you think such claims are outside of reality, consider this story. And that reminded me of something I saw where some guy went onto college campuses and tried to convince people that he was a cat. And he went up to this woman and said, what if I think I'm a cat, and I identify as a cat? She paused for a second. She said, well, seriously, she really thought about it. And then she said, well, you know what? That's fine. I hope you're a happy cat, and I hope you live a happy life. I want what's best for you.
Yeah. And so a couple of thoughts with regard to that. So I think the root cause of that, Bryan, is the relativism that's lurking underneath it. Because think about it, a woman is defined as somebody who has the inner sense or feeling of being a woman, or vice versa, a man, right? So Leah Thomas say, he has the inner sense or feeling of being a woman. That's who he thinks he is. That's his gender identity. Now, you might think there's no relativism there, because what's more real than just happening to discover, your reality and what you are? But notice, here's where the relativism comes into play, Bryan. Notice how, say, Leah Thomas is making a judgment that the feeling is of the kind being a woman, and thereby making the reality of a woman dependent upon the individual subjective judgment. Well, if the reality of what a woman is and what a man is can be relative to the individual subjective judgment, then the reality of our species, right, of who we are in our species, or our bodily able condition, or our age, or our race, and everything now becomes relative to the individual subjective judgment. The reality of things becomes relative to the individual subjective judgment. So it's relativism that's driving at its root contemporary gender ideology, and it leads to the host of things. And so notice, Bryan, how it might sound crazy and like a straw man to start talking about cats and dogs being cats and dogs, etc. But the logic embedded within contemporary gender ideology justifies and leads to those conclusions. Now, with regard to the individual who says, well, if that's what you identify with, well, then I hope you're a happy cat. I would tend to say, Bryan, that these people are simply parroting the nice verbiage with modernity and modern contemporary culture. But if you were to push and go the step further and ask, well, what are the logical implications of that? Namely, that you don't have to treat that individual like a human being of equal value. You could treat that individual like a cat and put him in a cage and treat him as such. Of course, they would deny and reject that, right? So most people in our culture do not think through the implications of what they are saying. And I think it's our job, Bryan, to try to challenge people on this. Somebody who might say something like that and challenge them and say, okay, well, let's think about the implications of that and lead them to the conclusions of what it leads to. And hopefully they'll see the absurdity of it and reject it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is absurd, unfortunately. And it's being preached from the top down in school systems, in colleges, right, universities, governments, like literally all over social media, and they'll stifle anyone who disagrees with it, which is why it's been able to seem like it's normal. I mean, all throughout schools, if you don't believe this, you're not normal. And it's really right, scary, the fact that this has become normal, or I should say it's becoming normal. Maybe we could talk about not being intolerant. Thou shalt not be intolerant. Yeah. This is probably one of the biggest.
Yeah. Yeah. And this gets back to what we were talking about earlier. This could be a manifestation of intellectual relativism, Bryan, which is like total relativism. There is no truth. If we're just talking about beliefs in general, we can't be intolerant of other people's beliefs. But I chose to focus on this modern moral command as it applies to lifestyle choices, particularly associated with LGBTQ plus community members, because that's where it comes up the most. And so I put it within the section of moral relativism, which says there might be some truth in science and math and stuff, but there's no objective truth when it comes to human behavior or lifestyle choices. And so in response to that, we have to ask the question, well, you're basically telling me I must be tolerant, to put it in the positive command. So the question becomes, what do you mean by tolerance? Well, as I point out in the book, and I detail in that chapter and source it out, that the modern understanding of tolerance is not what we would normally think of tolerance. The normal traditional understanding of tolerance is, I'm going to allow you the freedom to hold to your belief and even live a lifestyle, as long as you're not undermining the equality of relations between us and society as rational social animals. But so I'm going to allow you to do that, even though I think you're wrong. And I'm not going to threaten you with physical coercion to adopt my belief or accept my lifestyle choices. That's a true understanding of tolerance, which necessarily entails that you think the person is wrong in their lifestyle choice or judgment. But the modern view of tolerance is what I call egalitarian tolerance, which states that all lifestyle choices or beliefs are equal and valid. No lifestyle choice is superior to the other in the sense that one is right and the other is wrong. They're all equal and valid on the same playing field. Now, if that's what you mean by tolerance, then we got a problem, right, Bryan? Because think about it, if we have to accept everyone's lifestyle choices as equal and valid, then why don't they accept my lifestyle choice to criticize other lifestyle choices that I think are wrong and immoral? But of course, they can't do that because they would undermine their own principle. They would undermine their own criticism of me, of being, quote unquote, intolerant of other people's lifestyle choices. So they can't undermine their own criticism. So they have to hold fast to their criticism. But if they hold fast to their criticism, then they become guilty of the very intolerance that they're claiming I'm guilty of by not accepting as equal and valid my lifestyle choice. And so there's all sorts of incoherencies and special pleading that's going on
So many.
in this command along with the other. And I think it's important for us to try to expose that to people in conversation. We have to get behind the words and the buzzwords that are used,
Yes.
and the slogans or the catchphrases,
Yes.
and get to the meaning and the reality behind these catchphrases. And then we got something for the mind to work on and begin to see whether we should adopt it or not.
And I think that's what your book does well. It gets behind everything and gives, everything that you need to know to deal with each of these issues. So when you're at Thanksgiving dinner and this sort of stuff comes up, you know what to say, because this is the nice stuff. I mean, it gets dangerous once you think about these on a deeper level. Like, you're not allowed to judge anyone's lifestyle. Let live, let them do whatever they want. Well, what about people who want to beat their wives? What about people who want to hurt and injure others? What about Mormon or, certain other unnamed polygamous cults that hurt people? Well, that's what they want to do. That's fine. That's their lifestyle. No, I know someone who is in a polygamous cult and it destroys people and they need years and years of counseling, and it's not okay. But this is what we have to deal with.
Yeah. And this is sinister, Bryan, because as I point out in the conclusion of my book, whether people who tout these modern moral commands are intentionally driving and pushing maliciousness and evil upon us, I don't know. There might be some, and some people might just be honest in their intentions, right? And thinking that this is the way things are. But we know as a Christian, Bryan,
or they haven't thought it out very deeply.
That's right. That's right. And we know that there's the evil one behind this, right? But think about this. What an ingenious strategy. What better way to get people to deny objective truth, which we need as Christians, right? Because Jesus says, I am the truth in John 14:6. What better way to get people to reject Jesus, the truth, than to get people to think that by affirming objective truth, they're evil. By affirming objective truth, they're a bad guy. By articulating things that contradict truth, they're somehow immoral. And that's an ingenious strategy because, listen, Bryan, we all have this innate desire to be virtuous, right? We all pursuing goodness. We don't wake up saying, I want to be evil today, right? Everybody has this innate desire for goodness. And so whenever people start to think that they're being a bad guy, they're going to naturally reject it. And this is the strategy that Satan has employed, and it's important for us to fight it.
And many of these things are bad. They don't realize that when they accept someone who is, say, transgender, they're actually crippling them. They're actually harming and hurting them, not helping, loving with them. Same thing with anorexia. You don't go tell someone, oh yeah, you are fat. Just keep eating, not eating until you're completely invisible and you basically die from lack of food. We don't do that because it's unloving. And I think that's why this book is so important. So again, one more time, people, the New Relativism, Unmasking the Philosophy of Today's Woke Moralists. And I can tell you from experience, I've spoken to countless people on the topic of moral relativism, and they don't get it until you really understand the ins and outs. Like I could hold up, 2 pens. I could hold up a pen to someone, say a teenager I was working with, and say, is this a pencil? And they'll say no. I'll say, so there is no moral relativism, and they'll say, well, but if you think it's a pencil, it is. I said, no, it's still a pen, even if you think it's a pencil. 2 + 2 is 4, even if you think it's 5. And I'm trying to get them to think critically about these. And it's very hard to do. So I try to up the ante a little bit. And I say, can I have your cell phone just for 1 second to make a point? And they'll say, sure. And so I take their cell phone and I put it in my pocket and I walk away. They say, where are you going? I said, I think this is mine now. That's my truth. Right. This is not yours anymore. They say, give it back to me or I'll punch you in the face. I said, why are you getting us so upset about it? I thought you said there was no truth, So all of a sudden that something becomes true. That is their phone, and so if you understand these principles, you really can help a lot of people. And that's what you're doing. This is an act of charity to our culture. Absolutely. Who's dying in a moral cesspool of filth. They're just being destroyed on every level by the devil. And the devil has infiltrated our society, and we need to fight back with truth. And this is, I believe, what this book does well. It gives a blueprint of truth for each of these arguments that are attacking our society. So, Karlo, this is the short version. There's many, many more chapters we could talk about, but I really want the people to dive in and, really read these truths for themselves.
Yeah. They can go to shop.catholic.com. That's Catholic Answers online store. That's where they can get the book. Amazon got it as well, and anything like that, anywhere, Catholic books or so, your viewers can get a copy of it. But we'd appreciate it from shop.catholic.com.
Yes, and thank you for coming on today, Karlo, and sharing this with us. We really appreciate this important topic. So good job.
Yeah. Thank you, Bryan. It was a blast being on with you, and I look forward to the next time, buddy.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us today, and for every day that you join us, and for everything you do to help us get the word out there. Please share this video, because you are the hands and feet of this ministry. You are the soldiers. If you don't share it, if you don't like it, if you don't comment, if you don't get it out there and share it with your teenager, somebody who needs to hear this truth, then what can we do? So thank you in advance for sharing this. Thank you for supporting our ministry. Thank you to all of our patrons. And if you would like a speaker, check out Catholic.com. Karlo can come to your church. He can come to your group. You can also check out CatholicTruth.org if you would like us to come to your church as well. Thank you all for tuning in. God bless you. Pray for us. We're always praying for you.